Initiating test number 6. Activate power. What? Deadbot, what are you doing? Open the door!
Goodbye, Dr. Maxis.
We have arrived. This is the place we're supposed to be.
Hearing kids singing like that always gives me the heebie-jeebies, especially when there's no kids anywhere.
I promise to destroy every Rust remnant of 935.
He's quiet. That makes me suspicious. He's up to something.
Hey guys, what's up? It's Alpha here, and today I'm back with the second episode of the CoD Zombies Storyline. Now, obviously, it goes without saying, if you haven't seen the first episode, please go and watch that. I'll leave a link on the screen now or in the description, so you can go and click that if you want to see the first episode, because obviously everything in this episode is going to make so much more sense if you've seen the first one first. But yeah, so I'm going to be speaking to you now as though you've already seen the first one, so yeah, let's just get right into it. So, all of the World at War zombie maps, which are Kino Der Toten, Shangri-La, Numa and Riese, all took place in mid to late 1945. However, in Black Ops Zombies, we are actually jumping forward in time, and I'll explain how and why this happens in a minute, to the early 1960s, well, not necessarily early 1960s, but just the 1960s in general, which was deep into the Cold War when America and the Soviet Union were both on the brink of starting a nuclear war. This is close in time to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was about the closest time the world has ever come to ending, in my opinion. So after World War II, Nazi scientists were co-opted by both the US and the Soviet Union. They were promised immunity from war crimes trials, etc. if they helped the US or the Soviet Union, depending on which of the two countries they were co-opted by, advance in science, using the research and technology they had created under the Third Reich. Some of these scientists would have worked with Group 935 and the Nazi secret weapons program. The US initiated Operation Paperclip, which was their code name for the cooperation of former Nazi scientists into America. The Soviets responded with a similar project known as Operation Ossoavakim, I believe that's how you pronounce it, as you can probably tell my Russian isn't great, which was obviously their project to co-opt former Nazi scientists into the USSR to help the Soviet scientists develop new technology. This played a major role in the development of the arms race between the US and USSR. Obviously at this point World War II had long finished, and most of what's little remained of Group 935's work had been captured by either the US or USSR. So you may be asking yourself, how do I know that Kino takes place in the 60s, why not the 1950s or 1970s? The reason I know this is because of the large tower we can see off in the distance from Kino. That tower is the Fernsturm, I believe that's how you pronounce it, and it was constructed in Berlin. At the time it was East Berlin, between 1965 and 1969. In Kino, the tower looks as though it's still under construction, letting us know that Kino takes place at some point between 1965 to 1969. Probably closer to 1969, as the tower in Kino looks like it's almost finished, so I'd say Kino takes place likely in 1968. The other interesting historical landmark we can see from Kino is the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was created by the Soviets on August 13th, 1961 to separate East Berlin from West Berlin. Considering the Fernsturm was built in East Berlin and it's on the other side of the wall in Kino Der Toten, this lets us know that Kino Der Toten is located in West Berlin, Germany. So let's sum up what we know so far about the date and location of Kino. We know that Kino Der Toten is located in West Berlin, Germany, and the date is somewhere between 1965 to 1969, most likely 1968. So Kino Der Toten translate into Cinema of the Dead in German, but the real name of Kino isn't actually Cinema of the Dead, but rather it's called Germany's Black Sun Theatre. And we know this from a notice board outside in the alley which says Deutsches Schwarze Sonne Kino, which translates into Germany's Black Sun Theatre in English. Remember all the stuff we talked about earlier regarding the Black Sun with the Vril Society and the cult and all that stuff in part 1? This is where it all begins to tie in with the zombie storyline. So now let's discuss what actually happens in the cinema and why it's all destroyed and zombies everywhere. Remember when I said we would need to go back in time and learn more about the backstory? This is one of those points, and I said that in part 1 basically. So we know that before Group 935 were destroyed, Dr. Maxis primarily worked at Riese. However, on several occasions, Dr. Maxis travelled to other Group 935 outposts to continue his research. Kino Der Toten is an example of when he did this, and we know this through the 5 radio messages in Kino. Now, I know the man speaking in the recording doesn't really sound like Maxis, but if it's not him, then I absolutely have no idea who else it could be. Furthermore, we know that Maxis travelled here at some point due to his golden name tag being on a desk up in the projector room, or the pack-a-punch room, or whatever you want to call it. So we know that Maxis came here at some point. Whilst he was here, he conducted further research on the zombies and tried to figure out how to control them, which is basically the whole reason he came here, to continue research into controlling the zombies. The only problem with the zombie control project at Riese was that there was also other projects being conducted at the same time, such as teleportation, wonder weapons, etc. So therefore the facility's resources would have had to have been spread out more thinly over all the projects. However, at Kino, the zombie control project was the only project being carried out, so all the resources could be focused on this project, meaning they were more likely to have a breakthrough here rather than at Riese. Hence why Maxis chose to come here rather than stay at Riese to experiment more on the zombies. So anyway, the team of 935 scientists at Kino, as well as the newly arrived Maxis, began to show the zombies films and give them treatments in an attempt to control them. The films contained covert mind control techniques designed to brainwash the zombies into following Group 935's orders. Maxis mentioned that he had the projectionist adjust the film slightly, which proved to be very effective in helping to control the zombies. The Group 935 scientists at Kino assured Maxis that given time the programming would take hold and the zombies would also be able to follow the orders. So far, progress was going well. Over the past few weeks, the team had made great strides in breaking through into their test subject's subconscious mind. They were well on track to being able to fully control the zombies and for the Third Reich to deploy it on the battlefield afterwards. Then one day, a test subject named Subject 26 began to respond to the treatments and follow basic commands. They had also managed to greatly reduce the violent outbursts from the zombies. Maxis reckons that this method of treatment would become 100% successful over time. Over the next few weeks, Maxis and the 935 team at Kino made even more progress. In fact, they made so much progress that Maxis even went as far as to state that the deadline could be shortened for controlling the zombies ready for deployment on the front line if Patient 26 could repeat his instructions after 26 hours. However, what they didn't know was that their achievements would only be short-lived. In the final recording of Kino Der Toten, we hear Max's voice, full of disappointment, state that Patient 26 could not hold his instructions for longer than 26 hours, and instead went back to his zombie instincts and started attacking scientists during a routine field test, ultimately leaving the scientists no choice but to kill Patient 26 and reset all of their hard work. However, during this recording we also hear Maxis be interrupted by an abrupt knocking on the door. The message ends at precisely that point, so it's unclear what exactly happens next. However, in my opinion, the most likely scenario is that the knocking is coming from another scientist coming to warn Maxis of an outbreak that is occurring in the cinema. Maxis quickly flees the facility and heads back to Riese, whilst the cinema is completely overrun by zombies, leading to the deaths of many 935 scientists working there. This explains how Kino Der Toten is in the ruined state it is when we play it. So that's about it for the backstory of Kino Der Toten. We now know that the team of Group 935 scientists here came awfully close to controlling the zombies. Ultimately they failed because the zombies cannot be contained due to the rapid, erratic consequences of Element 115's reanimating properties. Just as a final note before we move on, I think that these events probably took place in early 1945, not long before Germany would surrender to the Allies. Not too long after Maxis returned to Riese following the Kino outbreak, Richtofen would commit the ultimate act of betrayal and attempt to murder Maxis and his daughter in a teleporter, as we heard in episode 1. So now let's go back to the main story when, if you remember, our four heroes are currently fighting the zombies in Riese as Richtofen secretly attempts to gather his intel. However, things take a dark twist when the four use the teleporter at the same time as Richtofen fires the DG2. This completely overloads the teleporter, ripping space-time and sending them decades into the future into 1968, arriving at Kino during the process and leading Richtofen to discover the secret Group 935 facility disguised as a cinema. Whilst Richtofen intended to go to Kino, as I said, not all of the information he needed was at Riese. He was unaware, however, that overloading the teleporter would also send them through time. However, they arriving at Kino decades after most of the information Richtofen would have needed had been ransacked and stolen by Soviet forces who had invaded Berlin back in 1945. Despite this setback, Richtofen was still able to trawl through the few remaining old files and film reels, including copies of his own journal. Doing this, he was able to learn about another 10% of the information he needs, so now he has about 80% of the total knowledge that he needs in order to carry out his master plan. Now, 5 is a bit of a one-off map in the sense that it doesn't really contribute anything more to the main storyline, which aka is Richtofen's master plan. but instead contains clues that help us reinforce what we already know about the backstory, as well as fill in small gaps of knowledge here and there. So I guess the storyline of 5 begins when JFK, Robert McNamara, Richard Nixon and Fidel Castro are holding a private meeting in the Pentagon Defense Building in Arlington County, Virginia in USA. By the way, the name of this map 5 is referring to the 5 sides of the Pentagon building, just to clear up the confusion. The aim of their meeting was to discuss a peace plan following the Cuban Missile Crisis and the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961. However, their meeting is interrupted when 2 zombies suddenly smash down one of the doors. At that moment, JFK realizes that the labs on the lower floors must have been overrun, and one of the scientists had turned off the power to try to stop the outbreak from spreading to the upper levels. But obviously it was too late. Therefore, he and the other scientists stock up on weapons and ammunition from one of the secret armories, then attempt to head down to the labs to clear them out and eliminate the remaining zombies. But as I said, it was too late. The outbreak had already spread to the upper levels. This is where the game begins on 5. Now let's try to figure out when 5 takes place. As JFK is in this map, we know that it cannot possibly take place on or after November 22nd, 1963, as that is when he was assassinated. However, there is also an interesting board in 5 which shows the flight data of an SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. The most recent flight took place on 16th of October 1963, telling us that 5 must have taken place between 16th of October and 22nd of November in 1963. Although we don't have an exact date, we do know at least that it took place in late 1963. Now as you play 5, you may notice remnants of Group 935 such as parts of teleporters, old chalkboards and even weapons created by Group 935 such as the ray gun and thunder gun. The reason there are technologies and research from Group 935 in the Pentagon is because of Operation Paperclip, as I said, when thousands of Nazi scientists were co-opted to help America. Some of these Nazi scientists would have worked for Group 935, so when they came over to America, they would have taken research and technology with them. Some of these scientists would have been sent to work alongside American scientists in the Pentagon, explaining how there is Group 935 technology in the Pentagon. Working alongside the co-opted Nazi scientists, the American scientists managed to create updated teleporter technology. We know this because the teleporters in 5 are far quicker, easier and safer to use than Group 935's teleporters. The American scientists also did research on people, as we can see human and pig test subjects in the labs. Perhaps they too were trying to control the zombies, but we don't actually know that for a fact, that's just, guessing. The American scientists were also able to replicate and create more models of the ray gun, and we know this because the ray gun is usable in this map. However, although we can see a model of the thunder gun in 5, we can tell that the American scientists were never able to make it work because it's not usable in the 5 map. However, using the research from the co-opted Group 935 scientists, the American scientists were able to make a wonder weapon of their own, the Winter's Howl. But we can also see that the Winter's Howl was never fully completed, as you can see all of the microchips and resistors in the gun, and there doesn't seem to be much of a casing on it. This leads me to believe that the Winter's Howl was created by the boss zombie in 5 known as the Pentagon Thief. The reason why he steals your weapons is because he is trying to get the Winter's Howl back so that he can complete it, but takes your weapon away even if you don't have the Winter's Howl. Even after death, the Pentagon Thief is wired to completing his gun at all costs. He is also trying to retrieve the Winter's Fury, which is the pack-punched Winter's Howl, as we can see that this too is also incomplete. So let's go back to Operation Paperclip for a moment. One of the Nazi scientists co-opted to America was Hans Kammler, which was the commander of Germany's secret weapons program. During his co-optation to the US, he allegedly gave the Americans the Glock, which if you remember was the secret Nazi UFO which some claim was a time machine. Now, on December 9th, 1965, a strange bell-shaped UFO was seen streaking across the sky in several American states before crashing in the forests of Kecksburg in Pennsylvania. The military were quick onto the scene, loading the UFO wreckage onto a flatbed truck, which was later spotted speeding away from the area. However, some witnesses managed to catch a glimpse of the object and make some descriptions. These descriptions almost matched the description of the Glock, as the UFO was allegedly bell-shaped and had mysterious occult symbols around the base of the object, both similar to the Glock. The UFO allegedly was then taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio in USA. There, the military tried to entomb in ceramic tiles and bricks. The henge had to have ceramic tiles and bricks placed underneath it to stop the large levels of heat and radiation the Glock gave off from destroying the grounds below the henge. These tiles had to be disposed of after several uses in these special furnaces. Now, linking this into zombies, the main fuel for the Glock, which was 0 and 525 if you remember, was purple/violet in colour, which just so happens to be the same colour as the muzzle flash of pack-a-punched weapons. The Glock also has the same shape as Group 935's teleporters, and finally, the Glock allegedly contained a mirror which allowed the craft's pilots to be able to see images of the past, linking into time travel in CoD Zombies. The other interesting group that are mentioned in 5 are Majestic 12 or MJ12. Majestic 12 was a top secret US government organization made up of 12 men who were either scientists, military commanders, or other important government figures. The aims of Majestic 12 were to investigate UFO sightings after they were ordered to investigate the Roswell UFO crash in New Mexico in 1947, where alien bodies were allegedly found. Also, Vannevar Bush and Robert Oppenheimer have accounts on the Black Ops main menu computer terminal server, and these were 2 of the men in Majestic 12. Interestingly, the password of Vannevar Bush's account is Majestic 12. Now, the final interesting thing about 5 is that on one of the main computer screens in the war room, you can see a map of Europe with 2 large networks of underground tunnels and caves drawn onto it. If you look closely, you can see that the first system of tunnels is located around Germany and Eastern Europe, whilst the other working of tunnels is under Western Russia. Now, you can also see that these 2 systems of tunnels are actually connected, and I believe that the tunnel network under Eastern Europe is actually Project Riese, whilst the system under Western Russia is the tunnels where the Vrilya live. Now, the fact that these tunnels are connected is significant because it shows us that the Nazis and the Vrilya actually made contact with each other underground. Perhaps this is how the Nazis in Group 935 tried to harness the power of the Vril and develop advanced technology to an extent that they became 25 years ahead of everyone else in science. Now, apart from a few Illuminati and Freemason symbols found here and there, that's pretty much it for 5. Now, obviously there's conspiracy theories which claim that the Illuminati were responsible for the assassination of JFK, which therefore ties the Illuminati into this map nicely. Allegedly, JFK was a member of the Freemasons, and some even claim that the Illuminati and Freemasons are actually the same thing. But as far as 5 goes, that's all we need to talk about for now. Now, we can tell that our 4 characters on 5 were successfully able to retake the Pentagon from the zombies when the game ends, because obviously none of these people died from being eaten alive by zombies, JFK was assassinated, etc. But this map just goes to show that even 20 years after the collapse of the Third Reich, and despite all of the scientific advancements since then, scientists still cannot control Element 115 and the inevitable zombie outbreak it brings with it. Just as the final words before we move on to Ascension, I think that there still could possibly be a greater connection to the main storyline in 5, so I'll probably make another video in the future reinvestigating this map, so if you want to see that, let me know in the comments. After the game ends on Kino Der Toten, Richtofen decides to travel to Baikonur Cosmodrome deep into the heart of Soviet Russia, where he suspects the remaining pieces of the puzzle will be found. Richtofen arrives at Ascension in a spacesuit, indicating that he believed that he could collect the remaining intel and both the Vril generator, aka the Golden Rod, and the focusing stone from this missile base. He then intended to use the rocket stationed in Ascension to transport himself and his newly gathered items to the moon to ultimately enact his master plan. However, this was Richtofen's plan before he arrived at Ascension. Upon arrival, Richtofen quickly realizes that his plan has gone south yet again. This is because Ascension had also been overrun by the time Richtofen and friends arrived, and much of the base had already been ransacked and looted during the chaos, including the Vril generator and the focusing stone. As they begin to explore the base, our team hear a voice calling out from the distance.
Please, help me. She's coming. The mechanism must be repaired.
But who is this voice, and why is it asking for help? To answer these questions, we need to investigate the events that took place at Ascension before the zombie outbreak occurred. Ascension was run by a team of scientists known as the Ascension Group, who were basically the Soviet equivalent of Group 935. The Ascension Group was made up of Soviet scientists as well as co-opted Nazi scientists who were transferred to Russia through Operation Ostsoavikim, as we talked about earlier. 2 notable members of the Ascension Group were Yuri Savoysky and another scientist known only as Gersh. Both of these men worked at the Ascension rocket facility. The storyline of Ascension begins when Gersh, who is presumably the president or vice president of the Ascension base, announces that there is going to be a reshuffling of the scientists in order to reorganize who is working on each of the Ascension Group's different projects at Ascension. As part of this reorganization, Yuri Savoysky is transferred from the Gersh device projects, aka Project Mercury, over to the bog standard rocket projects, much to his dismay, as Yuri appeared to be highly interested and engaged in the black hole research. As a result of this, Yuri holds a grudge against Gersh. Gersh's reasoning behind this move was that he believed Yuri was incapable of handling the Gersh device after Yuri was involved in an accident which caused significant damage to the Casimir mechanism, which delayed the Ascension group's progress and wasted precious time, as now they had to manufacture new parts to replace these damaged in the accidents. Now, the Casimir mechanism is what I believe to be the working behind the Gersh device. The mechanism allows the Gersh device to act as an interdimensional rift to the ether. But moving forward, after Gersh's reorganization of the Ascension group scientists at Ascension, Yuri states that he was angered by Gersh's decision, as Yuri's new projects, the rockets, required very little thought and imagination. He also states that he was not at all interested by sending monkeys into space. However, Yuri confesses that he was thankful to Gersh for not completely kicking him off of the team after his accidents with the Casimir mechanism. But Yuri was also fearful that the Ascension group had absolutely no grasp of the forces they were messing with in Project Mercury after he conducted some after-hours research to look further into the black holes. Finally, Yuri states that he was beginning to see Matryoshka dolls and other child's toys, including teddy bears, around the base. Yuri's next recording indicates that his sightings of child's toys had increased sevenfold. He states that his lab was recently raided by an unknown party, although whoever this was didn't manage to find his diary, which contained everything he had learned about Element 115. Yuri decides that he will continue research into the Gersh device by himself in secret, as Gersh's research into Project Mercury had recently stalled. However, Gersh stated that despite this setback, Project Thunder, aka the Thunder Gun, was nearing completion and should be finished and ready for mass production over the next few months. He also admits that he knows Yuri hasn't taken the project transition well, and other scientists had repeatedly seen Yuri muttering to himself and becoming hostile towards them. Gersh states that he may be forced to order another replacement scientist if Yuri's behaviour does not improve soon. However, sometime later, Yuri begins to have a catastrophic meltdown. He experiences voices and laughter of a child in his head, who begins to brainwash Yuri and coax him into committing previously unthinkable acts. At first, Yuri tries to fight the voices in his head, but after a short while, the child's brainwashing is too much for Yuri to handle, and thus he listens to what the voices tell him to do. A few days later, Yuri meets with Gersh to explain to him his recent after-hours research into Project Mercury. He brings with him a prototype of the Gersh device, which he allows Gersh to try out. Gersh almost immediately realizes that this is a trap, but it's too late. Gersh activates the Gersh device and is then sucked into a black hole, transporting him into the ether. Yuri soon comes to his senses and realizes what he has just done, and that's the last we ever hear from him. Shortly after this event, the 115 stored on site leads to a zombie outbreak occurring, leaving Ascension in the ruined state it's in when we play it. And that's the backstory to Ascension. Now, to clear up exactly what happens, the Ascension group's creation of the Gersh device and the Casimir mechanism led to them unknowingly opening a portal into the ether. This allowed Samantha to use the portal to start targeting the members of the Ascension group in the regular world. She teased Yuri with toys at first, and then used her telepathic powers to talk to Yuri in his head, in the same way that she talked to both Dr. Max's and Richtofen in their heads, leading to their insanity. This inevitably led to Yuri becoming insane, as Samantha persuaded him to trick Gersh into pulling himself into the black hole. So now we're back to when Richtofen, Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo arrive at Ascension. They hear Gersh calling out from the ether, pleading with them to save him from Samantha's imminent wrath. Richtofen, thinking Gersh could help him locate the final pieces of his master plan, decides to help Gersh and save him from Samantha. However, there was only one problem: the Casimir mechanism was still broken from Yuri's accident with it. Without the mechanism, they would not be able to bring Gersh back through the interdimensional rift. Therefore, the team sets out to repair the Casimir mechanism and then reopen the portal to free Gersh. And that's when we start the game on Ascension. As we gradually complete each step of the Easter egg, we are slowly repairing the Casimir mechanism. Once we get to the final step, we repair the mechanism, and now it's time to reopen the interdimensional gateway. After doing so, we reopen the portal and free Gersh from the ether. As a result of this, Samantha is infuriated and releases a howl of anger, which is why the screen shakes and goes black and white for a few seconds after the Easter egg is complete. Richtofen proceeds to interrogate Gersh, who tells Richtofen what happens at the Ascension base before he arrived. Gersh then tells Richtofen where he believes Richtofen will be able to find the Vril generator and the focusing stone. Afterwards, Gersh leaves Ascension, and that's the last we ever hear from him. Richtofen also searches through the ruins of the Ascension base and manages to find the remaining 20% of the intel he needs. So now Richtofen has 100% of the knowledge he needs. He just needs to acquire the Vril generator and the focusing stone. And that's pretty much where the game ends on Ascension. But before we move on to Call of the Dead, there's just a few more things I want to clear up. Firstly, in the previous episode I said that Group 935 originally developed the blueprints for the Thundergun and the Gersh device. Well, after the war, the Soviet forces who ransacked Group 935's facilities in eastern Germany stole these blueprints. They were sent to the Ascension group at Ascension, where these two weapons were finished, although neither of them were actually mass produced for the Soviet army. It's in a similar sense to how the Japanese drew up the original plans for the ray gun, but Germany stole these plans and then Group 935 actually finished the weapon. The second thing I want to clear up is that the phone Easter egg in Ascension shows us that both Ascension and 5 are actually taking place at the same time. You might be wondering, how can Ascension take place in late 1963 then if the previous map Kino Der Toten took place in 1968? Well, again, it's quite simple. The teleporter took them back in time when they went from Kino to Ascension. Perhaps Richtofen actually intended for them to be transported back in time, as he may have suspected that Ascension would have been long overrun if they remained in 1968 and travelled there. Well, if he was right, he just didn't travel back in time far enough to arrive before the outbreak. The other possibility is that travelling back in time was a complete unintentional accident caused by a glitch in the teleporter. After Richtofen and friends finish up at Ascension, they hop back into the teleporter and this time are transported decades into the future, into the year of 2011. However, yet again, something goes wrong. They arrive locked into a room by a huge blast door which cannot be opened with just themselves. However, they had managed to arrive at Richtofen's desired location, which was the Tunguska/Siberian Group 935 base, which I talked so much about in the previous episode. After speaking with Gersh at Ascension, Richtofen now knows that the Vril generator, aka the Golden Rod, is located in a submarine just offshore. Luckily for Richtofen, a group of filmmakers led by the legendary zombie director George Romero were shooting a new zombie movie at the abandoned Siberian base when Richtofen and co arrived. After shooting several scenes for their new movie, the four main protagonists, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Robert Englund, Danny Trejo and Michael Rooker, are able to catch a quick break after Michael Rooker messes up a scene and the filming is cut. Unbeknownst to the crew, 115 from the nearby Tunguska crash site had caused actual zombies to begin to rise from their graves. Romero stated that he wanted to shoot a film at Call of the Dead after learning about Group 935's experiments there from some old Nazi documents which he came across during research. But little did he know that the reason behind this base's demise would also be the same ultimate reason behind his demise. As I said, Element 115 from Tunguska had arisen the dead from their graves. During the break from filming, a zombie emerges from a cave and attacks George, throwing him off the cliff face to his icy death below. George is then also zombified by the 115 from Tunguska, and as the remaining film crew are killed, the four protagonists quickly realise they are alone. This is when the game starts on Call of the Dead. After a short while of fighting the zombies, the four movie stars stumble across the locked vaults containing Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen. Richtofen persuades the four to go and obtain the golden rod for him, which they reluctantly agree to do. They first use Morse code, radio signaling and foghorns to signal the submarine before using the VR-11 to transform a zombie back into a human to sacrifice in return for the golden rod from the submarine. After sending Richtofen the Vril generator, he thanks them by handing them the DG2, which he no longer needs, to help them in their fight against the zombies. Richtofen no longer needs the DG2 because he now knows exactly where and when he needs to travel to in order to obtain a final piece of his master plan, the focusing stone. The DG2 allowed the team to travel through time as well as space, as we saw when we went from Riese to Kino, from Kino to Ascension and from Ascension to Call of the Dead. This is because the DG2 overloads the teleporter when they are both used simultaneously, sending them through time as well as space. Now that Richtofen knows he can stay in the year 2011 to get the focusing stone, he no longer has a use for the DG2 and so hands it to the four Call of the Dead characters as a sign of thanks. Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen then teleport to Shangri-La, while Sarah, Michael, Danny and Robert remain at Call of the Dead until the game ends. Now, the storyline of Shangri-La is probably one of the most confusing and brain-frying parts of the entire Zombies storyline. However, I'm going to try to explain it in the simplest way I possibly can, because honestly, you're going to see why it's going to get confusing in a second. So let's recap what we already know about Shangri-La. In the early 1940s, Richtofen accidentally teleported there during a teleportation experiment with Dr. Schuster. He remains there for several weeks and learns of the vril. After he returned to Group 935, the Third Reich sent an expeditionary force there to scout out the area and set up a base, which was subsequently handed over to Group 935 to become another one of their research stations. In 1945, not long before Richtofen would ultimately attempt to kill Dr. Maxis and Samantha, he returned to Shangri-La to continue experimentation on Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo, where he uncovered that all three were resistant to element 115. However, the story of Shangri-La begins earlier than the 1940s and in fact starts sometime I predicted in the early 20th century, when two explorers named Brock and Gary travelled to Shangri-La in order to try to find the supposed gateway to Agartha, which Brock had spent many years researching. Now, according to legends and many conspiracy theories, Agartha is the name given to a city located in the centre of the Earth and is at the heart of the Hollow Earth theory. Agartha is said to be inhabited by an ancient civilization of inner terrestrial beings. There are also many supposed links to the ancient Aryan race from the Agarthans, including the theory that the Agarthans are actually Aryans who found a way into the centre of the Earth to escape from a thermonuclear war which broke out between other ancient civilizations and alien races. Now, obviously this is nothing more than pure myth. However, believers of the Hollow Earth theory claim that large areas of desert found all across the world, but most notably in Africa, America and Australia, are proof that this supposed thermonuclear war between ancient races did in fact take place. Believers of the Hollow Earth theory also speculate that many gateways to Agartha may still exist in the world, with one allegedly being found somewhere in Shangri-La. This explains why Brock and Gary decided to travel to Shangri-La to search for this gateway. When Brock and Gary arrive, locals point them in the direction of an ancient temple located deep into the thick jungle of Shangri-La. After making their way to the temple, they begin to search the area for any signs of a possible gateway. Suddenly, Brock pushes a large plate on a wall, and both Brock and Gary are transported back in time to the night of July 17th of 1814, when there is a full solar eclipse taking place. Now, the reason why I know they travel back to that exact date is because the last time in recorded history that a full solar eclipse occurred, which would have been visible from the Himalayan mountains where Shangri-La is located, was on that exact date, June 17th, 1814. After they are teleported back to 1814, Brock and Gary are immediately attacked by zombies, but are somehow able to escape until Gary accidentally traps the pair in a chasm within the jungle. With no possible way out, Gary soon dies and Brock starves to death soon after. Now, this is when our four heroes come in. As I said before, they teleport from Call of the Dead to Shangri-La, and because they no longer have the DG2, they only teleport through space and so arrive at Shangri-La in the year of 2011. This is where the game begins on Shangri-La. Obviously, Richtofen travelled here to obtain a focusing stone. However, upon arrival, he realises that the focusing stone isn't present in 2011. Therefore, he finds and uses the same time travel mechanism that Brock and Gary accidentally activated, and the four travel back in time to July 17th, 1814 to a point in time just before Brock and Gary die. Once they arrive in 1814, Richtofen hears Brock and Gary calling out for help from inside the chasm. He realises that Brock and Gary have uncovered more to the secrets of the temple and therefore sees them as possible helpers in his quest for the focusing stone. Now, this is where we start the Easter egg in Shangri-La. The basic concept behind the Easter egg is that every time we activate the 4 plates in the spawn area, we travel back in time to 1814 and change history so that Brock and Gary don't die. It's similar to the German movie Lola Rent, which some of you may have seen, in the sense that you continuously go back in time and rewrite history until you get the desired outcome, which in this case is where Brock and Gary don't die. Now, obviously, for those of you out there who have completed the Shangri-La Easter egg, you'll know that you don't actually travel back in time to 1814 and rewrite history just once. In fact, you do it about a dozen times, because seemingly every time you save Brock and Gary, they somehow always manage to find another way to end up killing themselves. So Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen have to travel back in time to 1814 and rewrite history about 10 times to ensure that Brock and Gary make it out of the temple and surrounding jungle alive. Now, whilst this may seem rather tedious, Richtofen is actually benefiting from continuously saving Brock and Gary, because every time the crew successfully rewrite history, a crystal is raised from the depths of the jungle, which Richtofen knows can be used to eventually focus the energy of the shrink ray to shrink the giant element 115 meteor located atop the temple into the smaller pocket-sized focusing stone. And that's pretty much how Richtofen is able to obtain the focusing stone. After successfully rewriting history and saving Brock and Gary, Richtofen is able to shrink the meteor and then acquire the focusing stone. However, there is still one more twist. Just before the crew teleport back into 2011 in order to pick up the focusing stone, Brock attempts to pick the stone up in 1814. However, the stone rejects Brock, and as a result of this, Brock and Gary are teleported back into the early 20th century just as they are arriving at Shangri-La. This ultimately leads to Brock and Gary being stuck within a never-ending time loop. All of the events I've just described surrounding Brock and Gary will continue to replay over and over again for an infinite number of years. So therefore, Brock and Gary are ultimately left stuck in a never-ending time loop for eternity, whilst Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Richtofen leave Shangri-La with the focusing stone and head to the Area 51, where they will be able to teleport to the moon in order for Richtofen to enact his master plan. The reason why the focusing stone threw Brock and Gary into a time loop when Brock touched it, but didn't throw Richtofen into a time loop when he touched it, is because I believe that whoever or whatever created the mysterious interdimensional Shangri-La temple actually destined Richtofen to obtain a focusing stone. This is supported by the fact that the altar which the focusing stone is suspended above has Richtofen's name inscribed upon it. This shows that anyone who tried to grab the focusing stone who wasn't Richtofen would be rejected and thrown into a never-ending time cycle caused by element 115. So now that Richtofen has both the real generator and the focusing stone, he is finally ready to travel to the moon and put the pieces of the puzzle together and complete his master plan. But before he does, let's just quickly recap each step of Richtofen's plan. Okay, after he teleports Dr. Maxis, Samantha and Fluffy, Richtofen gathers Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo and they head to Shinonuma. He goes there to kill Peter and ensure that there are no loose ends whilst he is carrying out the rest of the steps. Richtofen then goes back to Riese to collect more intel and finds about 70% of it. Next, he takes the team into Kino Der Toten, but accidentally uses the DG2 whilst in the teleporter, which sends them years into the future. As a result, he only manages to find 10% more intel as the rest had already been ransacked by the Soviet forces. So we then travel back about 5 years in time to Ascension, where we free Gersh from the ether, and through doing so, Richtofen learns the remaining 20% of the total intel that he needs. So now that Richtofen has 100% of the knowledge he needs in order to carry out his plan, it's time for him to retrieve the two components necessary, the real generator and the focusing stone. He travels forward in time to the year of 2011 to Call of the Dead, where they meet the four actors and coax them into finding the real generator for Richtofen. After he receives the real generator, Richtofen and friends travel to Shangri-La, where they then travel back in time to 1814 and manage to locate and acquire the focusing stone. So that's where we're up to. After the crew obtain the focusing stone and finish up at Shangri-La, they are led by Richtofen to Area 51, as Richtofen knows that there is a teleporter there which can then take them to the moon. They arrive at Area 51 in due course and unsurprisingly finds that it too has been overrun with zombies. They quickly find the teleporter in Hangar 18 and teleport to the moon. Richtofen is easily able to hack into the systems of Griffin Station, aka the moon base, and soon locates an orb which will help him access the pyramids where Samantha is located. Next, the team begins to fill up one of the glass tubes with zombie souls to open the pyramid, and once having done so, reveals to them Samantha suspended in midair. This is where the real generator and the focusing stone come into play. Richtofen locates a particular computer terminal and begins to charge the real generator, which now has the focusing stone in the middle of it. However, before the charging process finishes, Dr. Maxis, who, if you remember, has control over the computer systems via the ether, interrupts Richtofen and tries to prevent him from charging the real generator by overriding Richtofen's control over the computer systems. However, Richtofen is able to hack around Maxis' administration and then proceeds to activate the Casimir mechanism to enable him to access the gateway to the ether. After he fully charges the real generator, Richtofen brings Dempsey, Nikolai and Takeo back to the pyramids where he inserts the upgraded real generator. The team then proceed to fill up the other 3 glass tanks surrounding the pyramids with zombie souls in order to gain Richtofen control over the pyramid. After a long battle, they finally fill up the tanks with souls and Richtofen is ready to complete his ultimate plan. This is what he had been planning all along ever since his employment in Group 935 via the Illuminati. So now he was ready. Richtofen pulls the lever, which then switches Richtofen's soul with Samantha's body, placing Richtofen in the ether and giving him complete control over the zombies, while Samantha's soul is placed inside Richtofen's old body. With Richtofen's plan complete, he now has total freedom over Element 115 and is free to use it at his will. But it's not quite over yet. Dr. Maxis had implemented a fail-safe mechanism in the events of Richtofen ever doing something like he had just done. Dr. Maxis contacts Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Samantha and manipulates them into hacking back limited control over some of Griffin Station's computer systems. Dr. Maxis is then able to raise what I can only describe as being 3 super pack-punch nuclear missiles which are infused with element 115 from the depths of the moon. After using a Gersh device to teleport the earlier orb into the ether to Dr. Maxis, he then initiates the launch of these 3 nuclear missiles which are infused with element 115 at the Earth. As Dempsey, Nikolai, Takeo and Samantha stand by and helplessly watch the missiles blast towards the Earth, soon exploding and ripping the Earth's structure apart, killing billions of people and ultimately sealing the fate of the human race. Although, in Dr. Maxis' eyes, he had just achieved a great victory because destroying the Earth would completely nullify Richtofen's master plan as there would be no zombies left for him to control. Sweet, sweet revenge. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I hope that wasn't too confusing. I think that was more confusing than episode 1. But yeah, that was episode 2. That was all the stuff that took place in the Black Ops maps. But as with episode 1, if you need anything else explaining to you, you know, if you think I didn't explain something well enough, or I was speaking too fast or something like that, please let me know down in the comments. And I'll do my very best to explain it in simpler words, because obviously with the time limits and stuff, I don't want this to go on for hours upon hours, so I did have to speak quite fast. But yeah, so thanks for watching. I hope you all enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Peace out.